Okay, hey everyone. My name is Tyler Huynh, and I work at LTRA Engineers. And today, I'm also like the vice chair of the sustainability branch of Dallas ASCE, and I'm your host today. And today we'll be talking about some of the sustainable projects and programs that the North Central Texas Council of Governments, short for NCTCOG, um, is doing this day. And if you have not heard about that organization before, you will hear about it today and how it's so important. So we are joined by our two lovely representatives at NCTCOG. It's Lori Clark and Tamara Cook. So Tamara Cook, she's a senior program manager of the Environment and Development Department, and she's been at NCTCOG since 2004. She received her bachelor's in environmental science at TCU. Go Frogs! And then her master's in environmental science and engineering at UTA. Go Mavericks! She currently manages a program and projects with a variety of sustainability topics, such as energy efficiency, building codes, public works. She knows it all, et cetera, et cetera. Amongst her accolades, she serves as the director of Texas APA, American Planning Association of the Midwest section. And not to forget, she's the coordinator of the special awards for Future Cities competition, which ASCE Dallas participates and sponsors award, the Infrastructure Resiliency Award. Shout out to them. And so she's a person of many talents, but not to forget her one secret is she plays the violin. So our second guest or partner in crime is Lori Clark. She is also a project manager at NCTCOG, and she started a little bit after Tamara in 2005. She received her bachelor's in environmental studies and political science from Baylor University. Go Bears! She currently serves as the coordinator of the DFW Clean Cities Coalition under the Department of Energy. And one of her main focuses at the moment, spoiler alert, is she's developing an infrastructure plan to enable zero emission for freight vehicles along I-45. I'm sorry if I spoiled your presentation. But nonetheless, she works hand in hand with Tamara with a lot of these issues. And the fun fact for her, before COVID, she traveled internationally on a regular basis, going to 5 continents so far. I hope we can guess them out. So Laura and Tamara have been working on numerous projects surrounding energy management around the Metroplex. So let's give them a round of applause. So I'm gonna hand it off to Tamara Cook, and she has a presentation for us.
Yes, thank you, Tyler, for that very generous introduction. Let me share my screen here. And okay, so yes, thank you, Tyler, for having Lori and I today. We're very excited to be here. It is quite a lofty goal to talk about all the great and wonderful things that COG does on a daily basis and that we get to work on a daily basis with our member governments, because there's just so much, especially when you are talking about the sustainability realm and resilience and all of these terms that we are very accustomed to hearing now. And so we're going to scratch the surface on just several of the topics that Lori and I specifically work on. I've chosen to really focus on a little bit of waste, a little bit of water, and some of the neat things that we're doing, hopefully in the future on a couple of projects that we're working on, but certainly it is not an exhaustive presentation on everything that we do, nor representative of all the other things happening in our agency on a daily basis related to jobs and sustainability as well. So many great things. So with that, I will go ahead and kick us off here with just a few sort of introductory background slides. We always like to include a slide on what is COG, because we are a different type of organization. We are not a city, we are not a county, but we are still a government entity. And we were established a little over 50 years ago now. And we really exist to help support local governments in a 16 county planning area, which is the blue part on really we exist to help our member governments, which are cities, counties, ISDs, special districts like water districts, coordinate and plan for the future As we all know, our region is growing tremendously quickly. We are the 4th largest region in the nation. So that's behind Chicago, LA, and New York. So we are continuing to add population on a daily basis, and all of those people need water to drink. They need landfills to put their waste in. They need infrastructure and roads to drive on, as you all know, as ASCE. And so this is really kind of the mission of COG, is to help have all of those entities coordinate and provide a forum for them to do that coordination within. So in that role, we have lots of different designations and efforts that we undertake as a planning agency. Some of those designations that we have that are relevant for today's discussion are some designations associated with environmental designations of the Water Quality Management Planning Organization, and then also the Solid Waste Management Planning Organization for our region. And then also Lori, as Tyler pointed out, represents the DFW Clean Cities, and that is a designation that our agency also has under the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And that function she'll really cover later in terms of what that group focuses on, but it's related to air quality and advancing alternative fuels. And so I'm sure most of you, since this is a sustainability presentation and kind of what all the sustainability things are that COG works on, most of you are probably familiar with kind of the 3-legged stool of sustainability, but I think it's a good framework that we all are reminded of frequently in terms of the work that we do and some of the work that we have recently taken on in our advancing with our partners in our member governments and other organizations in our region. Primarily on the equity side, this ranges from environmental justice issues, equity in climate impacts, and all sorts of other things that we're really starting to spend a little bit more time in addressing at our agency. They've always been important, but there's an emphasis from a lot of our member governments in this particular area and building some capacity in our region, looking at equity issues from a variety of perspectives. And I think it's good to also put a framework around sustainability from more of a global scale. Many of our partners, including cities, nonprofits, universities, corporate organizations that we work with, many of them are leaning on this 17 goals that the United Nations established several years ago for Sustainable Development Goals. And when we really look at the 17 goals, they align. There's some of them that align very closely with what COG has been working on for over 50 years. And so I've tried to point those out with black boxes around them. So looking at clean water and sanitation and working with our communities on that. Sustainable cities and communities in general, which really is very encompassing. Responsible consumption, that's the waste management element. Affordable and clean energy. Lori's going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're working on related to that. Climate action, and that's a very broad topic as well. And so we've recently had a focus in the last year or so with a new committee working on some of those issues. And then, of course, life on land and life below the water when it comes to water quality and the quality of our land and open space. And so as kind of a framework for this conversation, North Texas sustainability efforts go way back. Our region had a very integrated, large effort in the 2000s timeframe that resulted in a document called North Texas 2050 in 2010. And while that document is now going on 11 years old, it is very relevant even today. And that document was the culmination of probably about 5 or 6 years of consistent regional engagement from a variety of partners and resulted in region-wide policy recommendations ranging from looking at the ecosystem in our region, mobility, housing, education and health, and even more. And the resultant document has an action package included that has a number of strategies that moving forward and moving the recommendations forward, groups or external entities or COG or others could work on to really advance the policy recommendations. And some of these actually have come to fruition. And many of them are a result of our mobility planning efforts. And so I wanted Lori, just real quickly, if you don't mind, Lori, just jumping in here on Mobility 2045 to explain what that document is. That would be great.
Oh, sure.
Hold on, I lost the slides, I think.
They're still showing.
Oh, okay.
You're good. You're good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. So Mobility 2045 is kind of the principal planning document that the Transportation Department at the North Central Texas Council of Governments puts together. And it guides the use of federal and state transportation dollars in our region. So one of the roles that we serve for the Dallas-Fort Worth area is as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which means we are assigned with the responsibility for regional transportation planning, and we serve 12 counties in that capacity. And so the mobility plan outlines on a 25-year planning horizon, what does the transportation system need to look like? And it's very multifaceted. We know we cannot build roadways to support the movement of 7 million people now, much less 11 million people in the future. And so what does it need to look like in terms of public transportation and active transportation and, managing demand for transportation so that we don't need as many lanes of roadway capacity. So there's actually an update either an update or a new mobility plan every few years. We're in the process of an update right now. There is a tool called Map Your Experience. And it's an interactive GIS map, and you can click on the map and say, this is a spot where we need a connection for a bike trail, or this is an intersection that needs a crosswalk. You can put little comments in. And so it's a way for us to get input from the boots on the ground, all of the transportation system users, because we can't plan to correct things that we don't know are problems. So we just always invite people to take a look at that Map Your Experience tool and give us feedback.
Thanks, Lori. And so between these two documents, the mobility plan on the transportation infrastructure side and the North Texas 2050, in addition to numerous other plans and studies that COG sponsors on a regional basis, there's so many efforts happening in our region on a daily basis by cities and counties, school districts and water districts that really touch on sustainability. And I've got just a short bullet list here of an example of some of the topics that our two departments touch on. Of course, any one of these is a giant list in and of itself. And this is not an exhaustive list at all. So some of these we will touch on today, not all of them. That would be a many-hour presentation to talk about all of them in detail. So we're looking forward to talking about some of those. And then on the right side, I just wanted to point out one of the things that our department worked on this past year and launched in January was a draft. It's kind of sort of still beta. We're hoping to make some improvements on it as we go along, but some indicators for our region, looking at some sustainability related items, but then just some basic data points for our region in terms of how we are currently doing, and want to be able to start tracking over time as data is released by federal agencies or cities or other groups, start tracking how our region is doing against some of the parameters that we've currently identified that are important to our region. And more recently, as I mentioned, we've got a new group in the last year that's very focused on some climate work that several cities have initiated and have been doing for years. But several cities there on the left have come together and are called the RISE Coalition. That stands for the Regional Integration of Sustainability Efforts. And this group of cities and also a Tarrant Regional Water District have come together over the last year and really advanced the conversation at a regional level on climate-related topics. We've always talked about air quality. We've always talked about food waste and all sorts of other things, and urban heat island impacts and green infrastructure and all of these different elements. But this group is really focused on sustainability just in general and all things sustainability. However, they have a very large focus right now with a project that COG is supporting them on to conduct a regional greenhouse gas emission inventory. So we have, as Lori pointed out on the transportation side, from an air quality perspective, we have a very robust air quality technical assistance program that we provide and services that we provide to the region related to ozone, but not necessarily methane or CO2 emissions. So this is a new area that we are embarking on with the RISE Coalition and are excited to work on compiling the first ever greenhouse gas inventory for our region over the next year or so. So I'll just quickly run through a few items on materials management or waste management, and then some water items. Those are the two areas that I chose to focus on today. And then Lori will touch on some energy and her electric vehicle items, and then we'll wrap up. So one of the major programs that we do house at COG is a materials management program. We have a very robust, large, multi-million-dollar program that we run on a 2-year cycle. And the boxes on the left are really the kind of key components of our regional program. And these are all guided by a committee that we meet with quarterly to help us define the regional needs of our communities and private sector participants that are very involved in the materials management industry. So like things like landfill managers and waste management and Republic and all of those type of organizations and compost organizations come together and talk about how to advance these conversations in our region. And we have a regional plan that also guides our efforts and is very heavily focused on the EPA waste management hierarchy, which is on the right there, which is, the most preferred option from a sustainability perspective is you just don't want to use as much stuff, because then you aren't throwing away as much stuff. And then you want to try to reuse things if you can. And so that's kind of the top of the pyramid there, and the things that we really try to focus on with our communities, and our communities do an incredible amount of work and education and outreach on kind of that first 2 tiers of the triangle there. And I'm sure many people have heard about recycling challenges over the last few years with bans from China, the challenges to our own regional and local state markets that we have, and programs that we have for recycling. But I did want to also touch on the energy recovery piece. That's a piece that we have just really kind of has always been part of our planning efforts, and we have many landfills in our region that are currently already doing landfill gas capture, quite a few actually. But Lori and I have been working together very recently and received a grant from EPA to look at additional energy recovery projects through anaerobic digestion and using food waste, which we have a lot of in our region, to produce renewable natural gas for vehicles. So that's something that we're really excited to be embarking on a regional study over the next 18 months on that topic alone. And I just did want to give a few pointers and perspective in terms of data related to waste management at the regional scale. We have 22 landfills in North Central Texas. That sounds like a lot, but some of them are very close to closing, actually. And so part of our job as the regional waste management planning organization is to ensure that we have long-term capacity accounting for future growth in our region, to have locations to put all of the trash in the future. And so we actually are doing a study right now for our western part of our region, about 8 counties, because there is a critical shortage of landfill capacity in that region. And the major landfill on the western side of the region in Weatherford will be closing in about a year. So we are actively underway with partners in that part of the region, looking at opportunities and potentially kind of future programs that they could work on together collaboratively to address some of those challenges that they have. And just for comparison's sake, in our region, according to TCEQ and the data that's reported to TCEQ from our landfills in our cities, we dispose of about 7.7 pounds per day per person in our region, whereas nationally the average is closer to 5 per capita. So we have quite a little bit of a ways to go in terms of education, diversion, which is that recycling component, just overall reuse and reduce, words that we all hear that we are constantly working on in our region to improve or divert materials from the landfill. And then there's some data here that kind of compares what our trash composition actually looks like. We just concluded a study in October of this past year. It would be that's our 3rd year of doing this study. So we've got 3 years of really good data now from a residential waste characterization study. About 50% of what is in a residential trash can is organic. So that is composed of food waste and things like brush or other kind of yard waste type elements. So that is an area that our committee is incredibly focused on right now, which kind of goes back to that food waste, energy, renewable natural gas conversation and study that I just talked about a few minutes ago. And I think I just basically covered this slide on our key efforts: food waste, absolutely, recycling always, reducing contamination has been a very important goal of our committee for the last 3 years, and we've been running a campaign called Know What to Throw. And if you visit timetorecycle.com, you will find lots of materials on that, and that is something that we are still very heavily focused on, and it is a joint effort with all of our cities in our region and all of our entities, constantly and consistently pushing the same message so that there aren't different messages going around about what can be recycled, but it really is focusing on the key items that can be recycled and that we want to push more recycling of. We did learn in our waste audit over the last few years that about $122 million worth of products that are recyclable and have a value to them are being thrown away in the trash can. And so that's an economic driver to cities and other partners in the recycling industry that we are really trying to focus on recycling cans and bottles and things that are very high value products. And this is the campaign that I was talking about. Actually, this isn't, yes, it is. Timetorecycle.com is on the left there. We have a whole lot of tools and information on composting for residents and all sorts of different information sources and resources. And then on the right is really what we're trying to focus on with our campaign. The Know What to Throw is recycle your cans, cartons, and glass, plastics, and paper. And we do not want anything else except for these things. So it's been pretty successful so far, and we hope to continue it. So just kind of moving along here quickly to wrap up on water. We, in our department at COG, I'm in the environmental department. I think I forgot to mention that at the beginning. We have a very strong water focus, and we have so many programs that we run related to different pieces of the water cycle. And those range from water supply, working with our water resources and water districts, wastewater, on things from supply in the lakes and water conservation, all the way down to water quality and what is happening from a impairment perspective in our region, and what streams and lakes and rivers are impaired in our region, and what can we do to install best management practices to improve the quality of those watersheds that drain into those specific impaired streams. So all of that encompasses these topics in a high level: stormwater, looking at green stormwater infrastructure, floodplain management. We have a very robust floodplain management program that has been around for many, many years. And then more recently, which I'll talk about here in just a second, we're really starting to take a look at integrated planning of stormwater with other infrastructure type planning, particularly in this topic, transportation. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So water, everybody knows water is critical to life. It's critical to everything that we do. And this information is from the newest Region C water plan for our water planning group. And as you can see, projections for the year 2070 look very similar to last year. And in terms of the proportion of use by the different sectors. And so really this just demonstrates that the blue bar that shows municipal use is only going to increase. And on the right, that pie chart really talks about where the sources of our water in the future for our region will be coming from. And you can see that the piece of the pie that is 31% is conservation. And so that is a huge part of where future water supplies will be coming from, is from just conserving water in general. And so that brings into focus a lot of strategies to bring down gallons per capita per day that you're using in your own home, things that you can do to limit outside watering on your lawn, all sorts of other things that we talk about at the regional scale. On water quality, we have recently initiated some new work focused on trash. The first picture there on the top right is of trash along the shoreline in Sargent, Texas, and on the coast. And the second picture below is of the Trinity River in our own backyard, and a paddling group that went out after a major flood in, if any of you remember the major floods in May of 2015, this is what happened to the Trinity after that flood. You can just see you can basically walk across that trash, which is really sad. And so we've got a lot of water quality issues here, as you can see. And we've got a recent grant called Trash Free Waters that we're working on with partners in Houston at the Houston-Galveston Area Council to focus on the entire Trinity watershed, but also several of their watersheds that drain into the Galveston Bay. And this project is really focused on litter control and cleaning up litter hotspots and putting them on a map, which is there on the left-hand side. And looking at other really innovative strategies, working with paddling groups, working with joggers and cycling groups to hopefully encourage them to help collect trash as they go about their daily jog or their daily cycling trip or daily paddling trip. And then Texas Smartscape is is a website that we also host. We host a lot of outreach websites and public-facing websites. And Texas Smartscape is one of those that we maintain. And it really is focused on education for water conservation primarily, and really through using native and adaptive plants. So there is a plant list that residents or really anybody, businesses, can get on here and search if they have a shaded area at their home that they want to have a certain type of plant in that's water efficient. They can go on here and look for one. There's all sorts of information and events and things happening around the region that's posted on here on a weekly basis. So that's a really neat tool that we have available. And then I know you all are civil engineers, so maybe you've heard of ISWIM before, the Integrated Stormwater Management Program in our region. We have 17 communities in our region that have adopted or are certified ISWIM communities, which is great, and we consistently work on trying to add more communities that are using and adopting these principles. But it really is about stormwater management, which is what it is in the name, and helping local governments, cities, and counties reduce flooding, look at water quality, and implement best management practices through a variety of different options, depending on development types, et cetera. And there's a tremendous amount of work and effort that has gone into this program over the years. and we are still maintaining it, and we have a great website that has all of the information there at the bottom that I've included. So if you are interested in that, you can go learn more about that. And then wrapping up here, Eaves is a neat tool if you are interested in looking at like a linear project, for example, a roadway. There's a tool that we launched last year, early last year, and you can go in there, put your project, or even a site location, and it will bring up a variety of evaluation elements and attributes to things like how much is your acreage, what types of impacts your project may have from an environmental perspective, and then also some best management practices that could be considered. Things like bioswales, rain gardens might be on there. I'm not real sure what all of, at this point, we've got on there. It's been a little bit since I've gone on there, but it's a really neat tool that we would highly encourage anyone to use, but really is meant for kind of early planning efforts looking at environmental issues on projects. And then getting to this project that we had on, that I talked about earlier, where we're moving to look at a proactive planning approach, particularly related to stormwater versus a reactive approach, which is kind of how stormwater is normally planned, is in a reactive or a reactive manner versus a proactive. We're coordinating with our transportation department and partnering with them on about a $10 million effort to advance this concept and do this project in the green area on the map there. And we're really excited about it. We think, fingers crossed, that we have about 2/3 of the funding secured at this point. We're working through those final details with some of our funding agencies, and hoping that we will be able to get out to these communities very soon and start talking about what we want to do. This is also a partnership with the Corps of Engineers. They will be doing lots of hydrology and hydraulic monitoring, modeling out there, H&H modeling, and lots of community engagement. And in the end, hopefully we will be able to use what the Corps is producing, which is some data for streams segments out there that have no mapping or updating mapping, and then bring some real tools and ordinances and model documents to these communities so that they can become proactive in planning for the growth that they're going to have over the next 20 to 30 years. And the last thing I think I have is the Trinity River National Water Trail. I don't want to do a presentation without making sure that I talk about this because it is so new, and we are very excited to support this effort in our region. In October of this past year, the National Park Service announced 30 new national recreation trails, and the Trinity River was designated a national water trail. So it's a national water trail, but also a national recreation trail. It has both designations. And the National Water Trail is probably the higher designation, and there are fewer of those in our nation. And so we really are excited about supporting the Trinity Coalition, who is the nonprofit that spurred this application to the National Park Service for this designation, and they are hosting the paddling information on their website, which is where I pulled this map from. And we are coordinating with them on hosting the first task force in late April to really focus on launch sites for this trail, and then also how to expand it going forward. So that's something that I think is so neat for our cities along the river, even those that are not along the river, from an economic development reason, and so many other sustainability kind of outreach, and everyone appreciating the river for the beauty and the resource that we do have here in Dallas-Fort Worth that really connects us all. So I just wanted to kind of end on that. So with that, I will turn it over to Lori.
Thank you, Tamara. So I'm going to talk about some of the work we've been doing with regard to energy management and renewable energy, and then I'll wrap up with transportation. So the first thing, I guess Tamara, okay. So this is a lovely graph from the Energy Information Administration that has a lot going on. But just to walk you through it a little bit, what this is showing is where energy is going, kind of that end use sector and where it's coming from and how those are interconnected. So when we're looking at energy use and we look at our role as COG, you can see those end use sectors on the right-hand side, how prominent transportation is, and then also residential and commercial use of energy is another big factor. We don't necessarily get quite as involved in the industrial space, but there's certainly a lot that we impact as a regional planning agency in terms of end users of energy. Next slide. So in looking at the types of energy consumption in the commercial space, another thing that we look at is what types of built environment structures fall into kind of our purview, being a council of governments where we're serving our member governments, cities, counties, special districts. And you can see that 2 of the top 5 types of energy consuming buildings fall into kind of that government realm, whether they're government offices or school facilities. And so this is a space that we feel that we have an obligation to help support the activities of our member governments. And so if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what we are doing. And we're really trying to build capacity and build knowledge among our local governments with regard to these topics. So using tools like Energy Star Portfolio Manager and encouraging our local governments to measure energy consumption, which is the first step to managing the energy consumption better, and using tools that are put out there that are free. They can survive staff turnover, which is the big problem. Building institutional knowledge, while you might have a staff person or 2 who are experts, and then that staff person leaves, how do you put this information into a system where it's not lost, when there's a point of staff turnover? And so really trying to encourage use of systems that can transition from one staff champion to the next without that loss of data. So we provide kind of publicity and outreach and things like that on some of the tools that are available from some of our other government agency partners, including some of the technical assistance that's available from the State Energy Conservation Office. They offer free preliminary energy audits to our local governments and technical assistance through a contractor that can really help kind of get jump started on doing some energy efficiency type retrofits. Adopting PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, is a financing program that's accessible for commercial and industrial property owners, but only if the local government in which that property is located has set up a PACE district. So there's a handful of PACE districts in cities or counties in Dallas-Fort Worth, but it's not consistently accessible across the region. So that's something that we're hoping to make an impact on, so that we can improve opportunities for some of those very capital intensive but very valuable retrofits to like chillers and boilers and HVAC systems and things like that. A lot of times a property owner may not know, am I going to be in this building for the next 20 years to recover my capital investment? And that uncertainty can be a deterrent. So PACE can help address some of those concerns. Looking at SolSmart, solar and renewable energy, a lot of our local governments really want to be supportive of those types of technologies from an air quality perspective or a sustainability perspective. So SolSmart is a national designation that indicates that a local government has put certain regulatory changes in place that help make their permitting or their ordinances or their zoning, things like that, more solar friendly. And so we do some outreach along those lines. And then building codes and the North Central Texas COG regional amendments related to codes are extremely important in making sure that everybody's on the latest and greatest version of codes is important for safety, but also for sustainability. And then we've got some resources about using underutilized land for renewable projects, including renewable natural gas, like that new grant that Tamara mentioned earlier. Next slide. So Conserve North Texas is a website that we set up a few years ago, and the idea here was to try to silo bust, because people may go looking for resources related to water conservation or resources related to energy conservation. And a lot of times those are interconnected, but you end up finding them on different websites. And so we wanted to try to bring things together. So if you go to conservenorthtexas.org, there's a search feature, and we have things organized by topic, but it's also organized by keyword. So you can find programs or calculators or case studies, based on a search term, and you may find something a little bit unexpected. And then the other major site that we have set up in the energy realm is Go Solar Texas. So we built this a few years before Conserve North Texas. This is another one of those public-facing sites Tamara mentioned. And this is Texas-specific information about solar. And there are several best management practices that are really geared towards our local governments in terms of permitting checklists for solar, so that a solar installer can go to several different cities and hopefully find similar requirements. There's a resource on ordinances and zoning, and do you want to be more solar friendly, or do you want to be a little bit more solar restrictive? Here's different types of language that you could use to accomplish different goals in your codes to help guide our local governments towards changes that they may want to make. There's also a series of training videos that they were live trainings, but we videoed them at the time, and they're still very, very relevant. There's one on real estate and how to consider the value of solar in real estate. There's one on fire and emergency response, which is particularly well done. And so those are posted in perpetuity until we do new versions. So those are available for anybody to watch. And then wrapping up with transportation. So of course, when we talk about sustainability, we have to talk about air quality, and we have to talk about transportation, because hopefully everybody knows we have an ozone pollution problem in DFW, and transportation is the primary source of the ozone forming nitrogen oxide emissions. And that's what we focus on, because according to the State Environmental Agency, we are considered a NOx limited region. So what that means is we can reduce a little bit of NOx, have a pretty big impact on ozone. The other pollutant that forms ozone is volatile organic compounds. And in our area, a lot of that comes from natural sources, especially oak trees happen to be big VOC emitters, trees in general, but oaks in particular. And we don't want to cut down our trees, right? So the best way to get at the ozone problem is really to look at combustion sources, which is primarily diesel combustion, which is the biggest source of NOx. If you go to the next slide. So I, just like Tamara can't do a presentation without talking about the Trinity River, I can't do a presentation without saying our ozone is getting better. So we still have a long way to go. And I know every year there's a scorecard that gives us a grade F, and we do not meet the standard, and all of that is true, but we have lower ozone now, which is better than we had several years ago. And that is a success. Now, we still have a lot of work to do. So how are we going to get that done is basically with buckshot. So if you go to the next slide, we have a lot of different things that we try to do to get at this problem. And so this is really just a smattering of images and logos to represent all of the different programs that we have underway, because we know that there's not a silver bullet. We say there's silver buckshot, and we really need to come at this from every angle from an air quality perspective when we're looking at transportation. So you can see like our Go Solar is here because it has an air quality impact. And the more we think about transportation electrifying, the more interconnection there is between our transportation system and our energy system and our electrical grid, right? So it's becoming more and more of a gray area, less defined. We in transportation are going to need to learn and understand a little bit more about the electrical grid. How do we minimize negative impacts of plugging in additional heavy electrical loads? And I can tell you that Encore is not necessarily concerned about the impact of a lot of us individually driving light duty electric sedans, but they are concerned about getting ready for the day that a major trucking company takes delivery of 50 heavy duty Class 8 tractors and wants to plug them all in at the same time. So some of what we're doing, as Tyler mentioned, is looking at a planning project along I-45. How do we support ZEV freight? And ZEV freight, zero emission vehicle freight, for us is both battery electric and also fuel cell electric. Fuel cell electric has its own challenges, but it also has opportunities to minimize load on the electric grid, or provide more stable loads, I suppose, for the electric grid, instead of having those high peaks and valleys that you might get with a heavy duty battery electric bus or truck plugging in at probably the most inopportune time, right? So this is just kind of a vision of a lot, but I want to dive in a little bit more on a couple things. If you go to the next slide. So Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities, as Tamara mentioned, this is a designation we have from the Department of Energy. And you can see that I've got an Electric Vehicles North Texas logo. Electric Vehicles North Texas is one of the main initiatives within the work that we do as Clean Cities. And Clean Cities has primarily been about promoting use of alternative fuel vehicles. And of course, right now, electric is having a moment. But we do support renewable natural gas. Propane is really well suited for school buses. Biofuels can work really well in certain applications. And so a lot of what we do is just working with our local fleets, public and private fleets, to help them identify, okay, what are your goals and where do you want to go and how do we help you get there? What resources do you need? Is it education, things like that? And then really help highlight the success stories that we've got locally, and then provide opportunities for peer exchange and education and things like that, as well as funding assistance, whether it's dollars that we are able to secure and distribute locally, or just promoting programs that are available from others. And if we go to the next slide, I do want to brag a little bit on some of our EV registration data. We buy registration data from the Department of Motor Vehicles, run it through some VIN decoding queries, and produce a bunch of interactive tools that are posted on our website. And you can see the website there on the screen. But I encourage everybody to geek out and play with this data, because we put a lot of effort into making this digestible. Hopefully we were successful. Please feel free to always give us feedback. But what we are able to do is see how many electric vehicles are in any given city, state, or city, county, or zip code. We have trends over time. What make and model are those? Different types of electric vehicles have different battery capacities. That has implications for how much power they need. Are they all in one zip code? And, is it the neighbor effect? I can tell you we see some of that, particularly like in Northeast Tarrant County. So there's a lot of information here, and it can be used for a lot of different planning purposes. We know utilities are looking at it, but it's a lot of fun. And then if we go to the next slide, one of the big things with electric vehicles is, with as much growth that we've seen over the past 5 years, about 30% increase per year over year in electric vehicle adoption, still barely 0.5%, or just about 0.5% of all the vehicles registered in the area. But depending on which forecast you look at, we could be up to 55% of all vehicles being electric by 2040. So if you think back to the long-range mobility plan that I mentioned, our horizon year for that is 2045. There are huge implications from a planning perspective, from an engineering perspective, and kind of redesigning transportation to really be a split. Half of our vehicles are diesel or gasoline, half of them are electric. What does that mean? What does it look like? We probably don't need in 2045 to get to a 4-way intersection and have a gas station on all 4 corners. But we probably don't need charging stations on all 4 corners either, because a lot of people charge at home or at work, places that they spend a lot of their day anyway. So there's a lot here, and I mean that's an entire college class right there. So just kind of pique your interest. So we do have some resources for employers and facilities. We have preferential parking signs. We have resources for workplace charging. We've recently launched a webpage just for multifamily housing. to help organizations try to kind of put themselves in a position to be supportive of electric vehicles. And I think next slide is, I think the last one I have, which is that it's not only about trying to transition to the lowest emission vehicles we can get. We also want to reduce as many vehicles as we can. So displacing trips, encouraging people to carpool or vanpool or take public transportation is another big piece of what we do from the transportation department perspective. And we do have an outreach air quality awareness campaign called Air North Texas. And whether you are interested from the perspective of being an engaged citizen or an employer, you can sign up to get notices, and we have like a blog, and it's regional messaging that we hope is consistent. So just like everybody over the years has learned reduce, reuse, recycle, you know, can everybody in the region become a little bit more aware of, hey, here are the ways that my daily life impacts air quality, and here are the things that I can do to reduce that impact. And cumulatively, the collective actions of 7 million people can be very powerful. So that's what that Air North Texas campaign is about. And that kind of wraps up our comments.